Be better if you got the view of that Google Cube from that, wouldn't it? Welcome to the session on WebRTC, and we're going to look at how WebRTC solutions should be robust, or how we build robust. I hate to say the word carrier grade because that really implies telephony systems, but systems that don't go down and don't fail, and some of the discoveries we made along the way. My name is Douglas Tait. I'm with Oracle. Who lives locally here? Anyone? Oh, you all are. Okay, and have you ever ridden the bike across the Golden Gate Bridge? One. Phil has. 2, 3, 4. Walked across. Anyone walk across? Oh, cool. That's the beauty of the bridge, is that it allows, well, what I want to say, interoperability. It's a vital link into San Francisco and out of San Francisco, and it gives this level of interoperability where you can walk, ride a bike, take a car, an RV, any vehicle across that bridge. It also has a high level of security. You know that if you're going to cross the bridge, there's a good chance you're not going to die or get maimed or injured. It's fairly safe, and there's a lot of safety precautions that are built into that bridge, cameras, surveillance systems, and policing systems to make sure it can handle and make you secure while you're crossing the bridge. And lastly, it's very reliable. It carries about 100,000 people a day back and forth across the bridge. I'm viewing WebRTC in the same way. At least this year, it has that same bridging capability. We're going from web to communications. And while this may seem like a simple connection, I found, at least in my career, it's not. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science. I have a master's degree in networking design. I'm always amazed at how far apart these worlds are. Now, I think the good news around WebRTC is we see these worlds coming together in quite a dramatic way. But what we see here on the web side, on the left-hand side, and connecting it to the network on the right-hand side, same issues around interoperability. Now, going across this bridge, this transport mechanism, we're going to see audio, video, and data channels in a big way around WebRTC. But more importantly, the devices we see on the browsers and the devices we see out on the web world, namely Chrome or Firefox or any other ones, they have to have that level of interoperability as well. And what goes on inside the network has to have a level of interoperability. So we look at the two sides of the equation. Same thing with security. The devices should have a way of securely logging in. A browser should be able to log in with proper credentials to get into the network, but also you need that security on the network side where I can't spoof, or I can't have a denial of service, or I gotta watch out for invalid messages, and that's gotta protect my website. And lastly, we can't have the same failures that we see on either side of the equation disrupt our normal means of communications. We often take for granted, what goes on a phone call. I know with me, I'm an AT&T subscriber. If it fails once, I forgive them, or I go out of range once or twice, that's okay. But if it happens consistently, I would change carriers. In the web world, we're almost used to kind of like the web browser freezing, crashing, or resetting, or doing things, which we tolerate to a great deal on data side. But when it comes to real-time communications, will we tolerate the same when we're watching a video, or a video of a person, or doing a conference call, or an audio call? So there's a different level of ergonomics, from the web world to the network world. So what is WebRTC? This is my simple definition here for those who know. I'm assuming you're here and you all know what it is. But it's basically just high quality audio and video built into the browser. It extends the browser for audio, video, and screen sharing capabilities. And it makes communications less of a separate application, or less of a thing we think about in the phone, and more of a natural feature or part of another application, or part of what goes on in the web world. I drew purposely here. These are the 3 screens that we typically see today that interface or are targeted towards WebRTC. But we heard in earlier sessions, and we see where the industry is really driving it, to beyond just web browsers. Taking a WebRTC API interface and push it out to gaming devices, or set-top boxes, or telemedicine, or finance, or anything that's mobile or remote, where you have the same hundreds of developers that can develop in this community can now also develop out to other devices that are out there. So as I mentioned, my name is Douglas Tait. I am the Program Marketing Manager for Service Delivery Platforms at Oracle. We are highly focused in this area around WebRTC. We got focused on this at the request of some of our key customers. A lot of carriers and large enterprises saw this thing coming, and they asked us to join them in their labs and to do a lot of thorough analysis, or where are the weak points? Can we really build something and deploy it? So what we have in this next half-hour session are some of our findings. Some of the things where we do see some shortcomings, or how do we plug those holes and make things work better in a WebRTC world. That is, doing communications from a browser into any network. So I'm thinking a browser to a phone. That's a good application for me, because I know my wife is always on Facebook between the hours of 4 in the afternoon and 6 at night. And she never has her phone with her. And so in an emergency, or I just want to call her, if I could call her on her laptop, I know I'll reach her. And conversely, I'm always on my desk. Usually I work from home, and 3 hours later I realize, oh, where's my phone? I don't have my phone on me. And I have to make an important call. Instead of looking around the house for the phone, it'd be neat just to bring up a page and click, boom, boom, now I'm connected and making calls right through my browser. Where we are at today, this is it's a collaborative effort from the W3C, the IETF, and as I mentioned, it's the built-in programming interfaces, namely around JavaScript, that allow you to do voice, video, and peer-to-peer. They are looking at the high-definition codecs that go right into the browsers themselves and standardizing on those on the codecs that are being deployed. I think the important thing that I want to emphasize here, though, very smart that the W3C and the IETF did not come down with a heavy signaling mechanism. They really left that up to the industry. They left it up to companies like ours and others, if you've heard throughout the day. How do I really do signaling here? I think they're smart in that. That's a really hard thing to do. We see that telephone companies or telephony have spent hundreds of years defining how to make a phone call and setting up a call and tearing down the call and doing communications. So they really left it up to the industry to say, you guys decide that, we'll do the presentation layer here with WebRTC. What are the use cases? What's useful here? Well, immediately the beneficiaries, I think, are going to be service providers and enterprises. I had a very interesting discussion with Lawrence earlier today, because we see, great, these guys out of the gate will have a utility here, but the real space is going to be all those millions of developers in the cloud space. They're out there innovating on a day-to-day basis. Now this gives them rich tools for creating real-time communications on a web browser. But these are some of the typical things out of the box that we're looking at. A service provider can think about extending their territory beyond what they currently have. I travel around the world a lot. I'm down in Australia, and the roaming rates are terrible. I'd rather bring up a browser and be able to go through an AT&T page back to the States. It saved me a whole bunch of money. It's an easy thing that they could do. That'd be a useful way for them to reach beyond our borders and go around the world. Think about any service provider can become their own OTT provider into anyone else's space. The other thing is around enterprises, you can think about the equipment that you have on people's desks can now just be a laptop with a browser, because everything you need for communications is right there in the browser itself. I don't have to spend all that money for all the IPX gear, all the phone gear, even the voice over IP gear there, because now it's coming through a browser on my laptop. The other areas, I think the low-hanging fruit here, hosted conferencing servers, that's an easy one. Contact centers, enhanced unified communications. If you're familiar with unified communications, you can do text, email, voice, voicemail. Well, then add just WebRTC to that as well. I can click on that, bring up a screen, and immediately have a conversation, video or audio, through a unified communication approach. And then when it comes to enterprise services, well, you can think of any of these things. Healthcare, having real-time communications between doctors, or even doctors and patients, doctors and nurses, or what goes on in the hospital, or even the records, because now you can have records come up as well as real-time communications as they're viewing those records. Real estate, banking, education, military. I have a demonstration, an idea, a concept. Do you want to see it? Should I do it here? Okay. I always get really nervous here because real demos always go wrong and they mess up. So I'm going to pretend I am in the Bay Area, and And I want to call my real estate agent. But I want to do it in such a way, I'm going to do this, so do it such a way that I don't need another password, username, password. I want to enter my Facebook account information. This is where it gets interesting. So I'm going to say Facebook here. I surf over to my real estate page. I want to call my real estate agent. His name's Scott. And I'm looking to buy a house in the Bay Area. So I know I'm crazy for thinking about that. I think, what's the password? This is a technique called OAuth, where I'm using a web, another means of credentials, namely my Facebook username password, to authenticate me that this is who I am, and then allows me to drop into the page. This is the moment of truth. Drum roll. It looks like I logged in successful. So far, so good. I'm on the page. Here are all the real estate, the houses that are up for sale in this area. There's a listing to the left, a wish list. I could even zoom in and zoom out, take a look at them, move this map around, pick one, add it to my wish list. At a certain point I go, wow, that's not a bad house. I'd like to call my agent. I'd like to call Scott and talk to him about that house and see if we can negotiate a deal. So I hit this and it asks me, can I use my camera? I say, sure. And hopefully this call is going over the internet and calling my agent Scott. Let's see if it works. Hey Scott, how you doing?
Oh, how are you?
Oh, he happens to be in the room. That's my real estate agent Scott back there.
He's a great agent.
He follows me everywhere. He's ready to make a sale. He's ready to close the deal right here and now. So Scott, I'm looking at these houses here. What would you recommend? I pick one here, and I add to my wish list. Do you see that on that list on your bottom of your screen? Don't look up here. Good. Why don't you pick one and add it to my list as well? Oh, there we are. Okay, so my hand, look, I'm not using my hands. He's actually manipulating the screen there. I said, that's pretty good. I'm going to clear some of this stuff out because it's really messing up the screen here. And he's seeing the same thing. I move this over here. His moves over. And I can even do things like, I'd like to surf. Every time I come out here, let's look at some beachfront property. Oh, wow. Don't want that. These real live demos are great, aren't they? Whoa. I wonder if I can do a refresh here, see what happens. Now, this is interesting because I messed up. And usually I mess up on purpose. That was not done on purpose. So I hit refresh, and we're reconnected. I think we're going to reconnect. There you are. Now, that was the other magic there, because all I did, I messed up my screen, and I actually had a real problem there where my browser zoomed way out, and it's like, oh, I can't see anything. I hit a refresh, and that did not disconnect the session. The session still stayed active. So all I had to do was reconnect the screen back to the session, and we're live and looking at things. In fact, do you still see all the markups that we did? Scott?
No.
Okay, so we cleared them all. I have to remark up and choose houses again and add that to my wish list. Now, I'm going to pick that block here. Again, see if I can do this without. Oh, there it is again. Amazing. I'm trying to pick things, a square like this. Do you see the same thing there? Yeah, I'm just trying to draw a triangle where I want to pick a house, but my keypad is very sensitive, and it keeps on zooming all the way out. So I'll see if I'll zoom all the way back in. And it's probably easier if I just refresh the screen again. This is the case, too, where I could probably accidentally, if I page back and page forward again, we still stay connected. Or I'll refresh the screen here and reconnect. There we are. Now, it may be the case that Scott and I are talking, and I want to take this session and everything I've seen here and show it to my friend Phil over here. And so I'll log in to my screen. And it comes up, it says, do you want to hand over? And I say, sure. So it shut down this screen and opened up this screen. And now I can walk around with that same session going on. I just passed that whole entire session off my laptop over to here. And so it gives us, this is some of the neat things we can do with WebRTC is we can now treat it as an independent session and move from device to device. If you notice I messed up there, hit the refresh button, yet we still maintain the state of that call on another server somewhere, and we were able to reconnect and keep things going. So we had a high level of availability or reliability. So thank you, Scott. That was a demo of my lovely assistant, Scott. You can give him a small round of applause. Let me go back to the presentation. That was, so that's one example of where and how we could take WebRTC and deploy it. And this is a well-known chart we've seen everywhere. Access for other analysts to come up and produce some more. But this shows the growth and the growth curve. Namely, we're looking at about 4 billion devices by year 2016. By the end of this year, we're already approaching 1 billion devices that are using WebRTC or are WebRTC enabled. Our active base is growing, to 1.5 billion people by the end of 2016. I think these numbers are fairly grossly underestimated. I think we're going to see a lot of WebRTC emerge right under our nose, and we don't even see it. I know Amazon has right now, you can hit the button there and do an immediate connect. I forget the name of that, remember it? So they've implemented something. If it's not WebRTC, it looks just like WebRTC. But we're going to see a lot of this come right underneath. We're going to be using WebRTC. We won't even know it. But here are some of our findings. Here are some of the things we see as shortcomings in the industry when we started looking at this, namely around interoperability around the signaling and media, specifically around the mapping. We see things on the web page, and there are maybe some specific details that we need to stuff into a protocol message that's lacking. And so how do I do this mapping from the page here to a protocol? Now, the protocol that we all are familiar with is SIP. So how do I do a mapping from SIP to a presentation layer or presentation layer back to SIP? And then what about policy and charging? Some of the things that the carriers have done have been really useful around charging and policy and bundling. Can I carry that forward into a WebRTC environment? Or should I carry that forward in a WebRTC environment? But those interfaces that I know, like 3G and 3GPP and other standards body have gone out of their way to define the standards here, which, again, in my opinion, there were way too many standards. I guess that's a good part about standards. There's so many to choose from. But what about policy? What about these other types of interfaces that they already have in the telephony network that we can carry forward and utilize and take advantage of in the web world? And then security is a big issue. We all know this. I mean, the number of virus attacks or the number of antivirus agents I have on my laptop or to prevent bad things from happening. I even just got spoofed the other week, where all of a sudden I got phished and they grabbed my password. Bad things happen on the laptops, but also equally bad things happen in the network, like denial of service or malformed messages that could bring the network down. So both sides need a level of security or protection. The other problem we see is a lot of the underlying technology we have here in the IT space really wasn't built for communications. So sessions get lost, and I showed you there where the session didn't get lost, but for the most part, if I were to extend that SIP call or that SIP session from one endpoint to the other endpoint, namely the endpoint being my browser, and I lose the session, well, I then have to do another redial or recall. And as you saw from that demonstration, no, you really don't have to. But the underlying technology there, we had to make it so I moved that session state off onto another server that maintained that state for me. If I had to do it from one endpoint to another endpoint, I could lose that connection altogether. Also, there's a concern I see. There's a lot of really good companies that are coming to the market very quickly, grabbing a lot of open source stuff, and producing some pretty neat WebRTC stuff, I want to say, for small enterprises. But when you start growing and your business grows to medium to large enterprise, or you start running to interface with a large network, a carrier-grade networks deals with millions of sessions simultaneously. Can a WebRTC solution support that kind of scaling? Especially when it comes to encryption, decryption, and encoding, decoding, So some of the key challenges we see is the app control. I write a WebRTC application. If a failure occurs, do I know it? Can I handle that? What can I do from that point of view? You saw where I hit the back button or I hit the refresh button. You know, does the application have the wherewithal on the browser to stay up or do something? Reconnect. How do I handle failure? Or if I go just from one network to another network, am I smart enough on the browser, like I push from this device to this, am I smart enough from the browser application to make that happen? Also, it's a new technology, but the tools are very limited right now. And we need more tools that address what goes on in the industry, both in the carrier space and in the enterprise space. Even though they're defining standards, we know what happens when you define a standard. They start deviating off the standard. And there's even deviations now. If you bring up Chrome and the earlier versions of Chrome, I think I'm running Chrome 29, and you go back to 26, 27, there are slight differences between the WebRTC JavaScript API. Same thing with Firefox, just subtle differences. And those subtle differences are going to come back to bite us. They're going to haunt us. Also, there's a lack of definition from the front-end client to the back-end server. You saw when I lost the screen there, I could just ask Scott, hey, could you resync me? Or I could resync him. Well, that's all done through a server someplace. And that syncing process is lacking, or that there's no definition, of course, coming from the standards bodies there. But how do I make that happen, or how do I make that a ubiquitous part of the planning around WebRTC? Identity management. I showed you in the demonstration how I could use OAuth. OAuth is that way of authenticating myself through another social media or through any other IDBM, identity management database. You know, where I can go and enter my username, password, and that agent says, oh yes, I know who that is. That person's correct. He's authenticated. In other words, my application really didn't need to know my username and password. He just needed to know if I was the right person to log in. So that identity management, if we don't have that kind of capability yet, then I could see my carrier like AT&T give me another username and password. Well, I already have way too many right now. Lack of security here. And we talked about that security on the front end. On the back end, we could see denial of service coming from the network, where all of a sudden, all the real estate agents at once want to call me on my pad. Or I see way too much congestion going on in the network. Or the lack of priority going on, especially when it comes to like video versus audio versus data. We may not care too much about the latency through data, but we certainly care about audio and care about the video latency. And we may want to look at, we're not going to treat all the messaging the same. We may want to treat video as a higher priority over audio, and then audio over data. And what about the media definition here? You know, about NAT traversals and anchoring. How do I handle going through with media from one end of the network to the other end of the network? And how do I handle NAT, ICE, stun, turn, and turn servers, and all these other capabilities that are out there? We're concerned about once your network's growing, just doing encryption, decryption, and transcoding could become a problem. Maybe not for 10 or 20 devices, but when we get up to millions of devices, all of a sudden we could be bogging down the system and we may not scale properly. Issues around interworking. How do I interwork from this device to another device? And again, how do I make sure I do proper encryption from one network to another network? And there may be a lack of transcoding or poor transcoding on the codec level. So how do we address these issues? Well, you know, I know we at Oracle are looking at the solution here. We're be delivering out a platform, but then it brings up about that equation where I look at both what comes on the front end from a device WebRTC interface and also the back end network side. I think this is we got a tremendous amount of assets and leverage out of our Acme Packets acquisition because they really understand that network side. How do I make networks interact together, and then how do I bring out to the front end? But how do I provide these key features? Reliability, scalability, availability, browser encryption, interoperability, and security. So one way, and this is a definition that comes right from the W3C, is something we call rehydration, and that's what you saw here where I hit the back button or something goes wrong. We're dealing with two things here. We have a session, a SIP session, where we're making a call into, and the endpoint's coming to a server, and then we have the WebRTC or JSON JavaScripting presentation layer coming out to the front end. I lost the browser. Something happened here. Actually, something legitimately wrong happened. I refreshed it. I basically killed that WebSocket connection, but the session was still active. So I was able to rehydrate and reconnect. But this method of rehydration, of basically separating that from the connection or the session, keep the session active, I can do a lot of things now. I can recover from failures like you saw here, or if I go from one network to another network, I can now just pass the session, keep the session active, but pass that session from one network to the other network on my phone or on my tablet. I move from LTE to Wi-Fi. Can I now keep that session active across that? Well, of course I can, because through rehydration. Another part of rehydration is recording or interconnect or legal intercept, where I can come in with a third party and rehydrate and reconnect and listen in if I had to. There's a law in the US where the governing body is allowed to do that. Of course, this is not good news in light of this NSA debacle and what we see happening around the world, but nevertheless, we have that technology, or the rehydration allows us to do this. So it helps us not only to recover from failures, but also allows us to move from device to device and network to network. Scalability and availability we see as key features to make it reliable. And this fits in two realms. You want to have whatever you build here in the network to be an N+1 configuration. Failure happens here, we can immediately switch over. We're familiar with those scenarios in telephony. We're familiar with those scenarios in fault-resistant systems. So you have that on the back end. But then there's this issue on the front end, what I want to call, where normally sometimes you have peer-to-peer, or I may be going across several different networks. I could be going from my AT&T network to a Verizon network, and I'm going to have to provide some kind of media anchoring. Well, that means I need to do some kind of endpoint and then translate that media from one codec to another codec, maybe go out to a phone or go out to another browser, or now I'm going from one network to another. And that's what happens when I do media anchoring. And there needs to be some form of intelligence here, and where we can ask that question, is he going peer-to-peer? Is that just a simple connection? Or do I need to do media anchoring? Now, the one problem about media anchoring, or some of the problems we've seen out there is, okay, they add media anchoring, where I'm now adding another one. Oh, now here's another session, they do another, and another, and another. Oh, we need to scale the media anchoring. But then they're not getting rid of them. All of a sudden, those sessions go away, and the media stays anchored, and we've just chewed up a whole bunch of resources. So this notion of dynamic media anchoring, or having the capability of being smart about it, and put that on smarts on the server side and ask that question, oh, we're just going peer-to-peer here. I know I have IP addresses. What's the best route? How can I do the best media from one point to another point? And how do I do dynamic media anchoring? The other key area where we see is around the SDK, or software development kit. And this is one area we've focused on, and this obviously with the company like Oracle, I would expect the same thing from another IT company where they're used to software development kits where they can expand and grow this. But going from a low-end, easy to use to high-end complex set of tools, extremely useful for developers. Now, if you took a look at the WebRTC JavaScript, even what they produce today, it's a little complex. You want to almost just say, I just want to make a call. Or I just want to register in the system. You just want to make these simple calls. So you want to have a certain set of tools where they're easy. Then you maybe want to get on a very complex side where I want to do conferencing and add a whole bunch of things to a conferencing server. So you need a broad spectrum or broad range around that software development kit. And add things like resynchronization, or client authentication, or like we saw with OAuth, or session management, or at least some kind of smarts here where I can enable these applications to know whether I had a failure, or I'm leaving one network, I'm going from one device to another device. So also network encryption on the network side. It is a big part of interoperability. The WebRTC to SIP IMS signaling interworking sometimes doesn't match 100%. In fact, for the most part, it doesn't. I came from the world of SIP and ISUP and TCAP and INAP, where these things were big messages, and there's a lot of data you had to shove in them, and you had to analyze all that data. And here at the front end, we're just saying, no, make a call, or set this up. Here's my simple credentials to call that IP address. So doing that, I want to say, extending or adding what I need to add into the SIP network to make that work. And then conversely, if I receive things back that I don't have all that information for doing display purposes, I may need to do some kind of dynamic change or introduce things, data or sessions or protocols or messages along the way. So that's where I see this, the web signaling engine or media control can now inject that or interject that into the messaging, either and express it on the front end or do it on the back end. So we talked a little bit about AAA or authentication, and I mentioned about OAuth, leveraging the existing ones out there. I think the other thing I want to mention, though, I used the Facebook back there, and we didn't see Scott logged in, but Scott, he used the telco credentials that were given to him. But they have the capability of doing a plugin on the credential side. There's enough IDBMs out there, enough databases for identity management, that we have to have a simple way of taking what's out there and just plugging it in and doing authentication here. Whether I do it through OAuth or whether I do it directly through what the telco or the enterprise or the cloud offers us here. And I also mentioned about attacks or denial of service. I think the important thing here, we're all concerned about denial of service. But just the fact that I see a lot of these solutions coming out here that could handle small payloads, a small set of number of sessions. But once we start getting heavy-duty transcoding or heavy-duty encryption, we're going to bog down the network, and we're going to see some failures there. Does it scale well? Well, how well does it scale? Can I add 5,000 new WebSockets on the one end? Can I handle 1 million busy-hour call attempts on the session side? So these are the issues I know that large enterprises and carriers are looking at because they want to scale completely upwards without having any glass ceiling that they have to break, to make this happen. So network authentication and overloading for that border security. Those are some of the things. I got criticized on the webinar from Huawei, of course, one of our competitors. They said, "You're kind of negative, aren't you?" It's like, WebRTC is a really cool, great technology. In fact, I know at our company, it's the bright, shiny object. It's got everyone's attention. It's got the industry's attention. So maybe there's enough positive things that are out there, and I think it's going to really change the industry in a dramatic way. We see the interoperability, security, and reliability here. Walking across that bridge, riding the bike, you don't even think about these things, and it's a very pleasant experience. I think we're going to see the same thing with WebRTC. If we have that same kind of capability here, we know WebRTC is going to be a pleasant experience. I know for a fact that once I start hearing that quality coming from my browser over my phone, I'm going to go to my browser. Even though I don't want to have people see me in my pajamas making conference calls at 10 in the morning, I'll just go to audio because the quality will be better here. And the way and the things I can do here far exceed what I can do here, as far as adding functions and features. A colleague of mine called that the Gmail experience. Now I can go to any browser and bring up my Gmail and answer my mail. I don't have to go specifically to my laptop that has Outlook on it. I can go anywhere, any place. I can have Gmail here, I have Gmail here. The same thing with communications. We'll be able to go any browser, any place, and have that interoperability, security, and reliability. So I see the two worlds coming together, this highly regulated IMS, PSTN, working together with this whole very dynamic real-time communications or real-time web IP domain. You bring both these together, you can take that secure, reliable, rigidly defined service and mix that with your feature-rich services, and you come up with the best of both worlds. Of course, I see these are the key things that you have to add to that, the security, interoperability, and reliability. I mentioned it here, reliability, interoperability, security, but on both sides. So I look at the application or browser side. For every single one of these, you have to have on the application browser side as well as the network side. On the reliability side, we already talked about rehydration or network handover. But for reliability on the network side, have that method of scalability and growing as well as high availability. Interoperability, that browser support built into the SDK or have that capability to go from any browser to any browser without any hiccups, as well as having a simple way to do application integration into the browser. Well, we have the interoperability on the network side because we see issues around encryption, not maybe for small systems, but as we grow and have to do a lot of encryption, and also around the network protocols and those subtle differences in network protocols. Security, identity management, user authentication, that's obvious on when I log in. But on the network side, how do I do network authentication and overload protection? Either for creating new service, extending services, but do it for both the application and the network. Thank you. Appreciate your time. I don't know if we have time for questions. I got a few minutes for questions. Anyone? awe and wonderment of WebRTC. Yes?
Two questions. When you interacted with your colleague, what was the handle you used to connect to him?
That was to be honest, that was a simple peer-to-peer connection.
His IP address or something?
Yep, his IP address, and he was logged into an application. So we knew the application, or we knew the address on the common server. So on my side, you saw just a simple link. He had the same simple link on his side. You could call me, or you can bring up a list of agents. What I didn't show in the application was I could bring up a whole set of contacts and enter your phone numbers and other phone numbers are in there, and then of course go through a gateway if I wanted to in the network.
But
Yeah.
you used WebRTC there to establish the IP connection.
Yes, I did.
Right?
Yes.
They met on the web page. They met in the application.
Oh, okay.
That's right. And that was WebRTC media going from back and forth, and the whole WebRTC connection that made it happen.
You had already used the new offer.
How does Oracle hope to, just understanding how would Oracle monetize this? Will we sell it as an appliance to enterprise? Or how?
That's a good way of thinking about it, because and we see it as a necessary appliance. Right now, we see a lot of gateways coming out there, and they're satisfying a lot, but or maybe hitting maybe a sweet spot there. But you need more than just a simple gateway, and that's what we saw here. Even just doing even just going from JSON, JavaScript to SIP, there's work that has to be done, and usually in a dynamic fashion. There's not one size does not fit all. So we see, there's a lot of good tools we already have there in, WebLogic, or even in what goes inside that for supplying those tools that not only we can do or RPS can do, but also either a carrier or an enterprise or even a shop that wants to develop that web page can now add as a feature or that. That's just one aspect of it. All these aspects we've seen as being key things that we can deliver on. We're coming from two sides. I come from a telco background. I'm in the communications group. I'm responsible for what we call our converged application server. It's a WebLogic server that has SIP and IP communications built in. So I can not only do database stuff, but I can also make calls from the same server. And of course, it's fault tolerant, it's fault resilient, it's highly scalable, and all those other wonderful things, but it's a great voice over IP or IMS app server. So we took that and started building on top of this, the application. And we got halfway through then, we were getting all these requirements came, I wish we could claim that we made these requirements. These requirements came from 4 major carriers throughout the world. I can only name one because they went public, and that's Telecom Italia. So Telecom Italia, they even took this and ran their internal contact information. So you bring up the Telecom Italia page and then click on it, boom, they make phone calls right internally already using this. And it's something that they're already spinning out. They're already adding a whole ecosystem around this, using this kind of platform to allow other third-party developers to develop applications against their network. That's back to some of the comments earlier, Lawrence, that I think they're very clever on. They said, oh, we can open up, this is a whole new world for third-party developers to develop on. So that's the one side of the equation. And then we had the fortunate benefit of acquiring Acme Packets, who they're brilliant at session border controller. They also had something in the works for about a year at the same time, where they're looking at the same thing, except they're really focused around media. So we took what we're doing in signaling with OCAS and what they're doing around media and combined them together. So that's why we see the best of both worlds.
WebRTC is not just about video or audio. You can basically stream any data, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
kind of from that perspective.
Well, you saw, in fact, I had the map up, and I was drawing on the map. That's a data channel, and that was going back to Scott. So I had 3 channels open. I had the video, audio. I had it on mute, by the way, because we had feedback and noise. But then also the data channel, and we're sharing the data channel. I was drawing the map, and you see I messed up the map up here. He probably saw that back there, but we could share the whole data channel. You can go so far as passing whole web pages down the data channel or anything down the data channel. Right before me was a session just on that data channel. And actually, it was very interesting. What was the name of the company, Lawrence? Do you remember? PubNub, yeah. PubNub, in that they were just going extreme. They're saying, what's our max? We're publishing information, kind of push how many megabytes down through that data channel. So that's, kind of just push videos, kind of just do video streaming. Well, I asked, well, I did that when you already have a video channel. You can do streaming over the video channel, which that's what it's designed for. But you can see the data channel is wide open, and you do a lot of data passing at the same time.
Yeah, because I see more use cases there than video.
Oh, so do I. I mean, you know, you saw my enterprises up there, and we tried to highlight that. But you can see, hey, I want to make a phone call, or I'm right in the middle of a process. I'm a half hour into it. I don't want to lose this data, and you know, whether it's Home Depot or whether it's a hospital or whoever I'm calling, it's usually my travel agent, and they come on. The very first question is, "Oh, how may I help you?" Well, I'm in the middle of this process, and they always take me back to step one. It's like, no, well, sync. Look at everything I'm doing right now, and you want to have them see everything you're doing, pass that right through the data channel. So it makes real good sense, especially for call centers. Yeah.
So it's a little like VNC where you grab the frame buffer or part of it and send it over the data channel?
Programmatically, you would grab things and send over the data channel. So VNC, I think, takes the whole entire image and transports the image. Here, we're doing on a section-by-section basis, which is pretty interesting here, because if you notice, I had one screen, I had audio, video, and had data. So I had really 3 separate sessions that were going on between us under subsessions. You saw I went blank here and switched over. He just flicks once, and then.
Did you see a new offer or a new session coming over? That
No, he sees the whole same. He sees the same thing.
okay.
Nothing really changed.
Even though you're sending to it already?
Right. You know, it flicked from that device to this device, so he sees the same flicker.
Okay. But from the safety point of view, you had to transmit to your iPad versus your
Yeah, which is really that's more of a media handoff issue, right?
Okay.
The session was still established. Now it's just a matter of let me find that new endpoint. You know, so we're still sending the media from his device to my server, and then we had to go server to the device. So I changed the device. That media is still coming here, and now we're going across. And you can see that's a great place to add some of that media anchoring or other things at that point, or do that session border controller that Acme brings. You know, so there's a lot of area we can play there. Well, thank you for your time. Good session.